Okay, so I'm here with Steve Lomazow, who is one of the world's great collectors of American magazines. Do you do other than American or just American?
I do Americana, so anything that pertains to America, for instance, a British magazine that may have the Declaration of Independence in it, for instance, or a Canadian magazine that may have some reference to American culture. But I don't collect per se non-American periodicals.
Okay. So you recently put together an exhibition that took place at the Grolier Club and produced a beautiful catalog called Magazines in the American Experience. So that's what I've been reading through and drooling over.
Well, thank you, sir.
It's beautiful. It's also very informative too. So you had a lovely introductory essay, short essay. In it, you say that collectors have a DNA that gives them a deep satisfaction when they discover and acquire a new item.
That is true. There's something innate about collecting, it could be anything. It could be stamps, antiques.
You either have it or you don't have it. Is that it?
One thing I can say, it's impossible to try to get somebody interested in magazines or any collectible item if they don't. A perfect example are academics. Yes. Academics love to talk about what's in magazines, who formed the magazine and what it says, but the actual idea of owning one and putting together a collection of them is totally beyond their ken. They have no appreciation of that whatsoever. Right. It's apples and oranges.
Yeah, it's true, isn't it? It's just like, I want to have it. That's a real urge, a need to possess it.
Right, and that's why the Grolier Club is what it is, because we are a group of people who share this. Nick Basbane wrote a book about it. He called it the Gentle Madness.
Right,
and we share this gentle madness.
Yes.
And it dominates our lives because it's a tremendous source of pleasure to be able to get something new every day. Not a day goes by in my life that I don't look at something and say, wow. Yesterday, for instance, I made my first road trip in 2 years. I went to Hartford. There was an ephemera show in Hartford.
What'd you get?
Things from my collection, but it was fun just to see my fellow collectors and dealers I've known for years, and talk about the things we love.
Okay, so what did you find?
I found a periodical that was published in New Hampshire in 1821. It was the first issue of this particular. It was the New Hampshire Agricultural Journal. It was in its original paper wrappers from 1821. I'd never had a copy. I looked it up, and there's only 1 or 2 known copies in existence.
Sorry, where did you look it up?
Well, there's the Union List of Serials, and there's the online catalog. OCLC is a very good reference to find anything. And then I just Googled it, and there's one digital copy at Harvard University, and there it was. So there's a tremendous amount of digitalization going on right now. Of rare periodicals, rare newspapers and periodicals. So people are very compulsive about trying to record anything that was printed in a digital fashion. I have to say that I probably have in my collection 200 or 300 things which are not anywhere other than in my collection. So that makes it fascinating as well. This happened to be there. I didn't know it was there beforehand. That's what I got. That's what I got for my personal collection. The other thing I got yesterday was a friend of mine who I'm going to be writing a book with about America, about things behind me, the World War II printing. He collects flags, so I got some wonderful American flag periodicals. One of them was a wonderful program of P.T. Barnum being honored in Great Britain in 1889, and had a beautiful flag on the cover and a Union Jack on the back. And inside was the program of a banquet where 1,500 people attended, including the Queen and the Prince of Wales, honoring Barnum. And my friend, who's a very good researcher, found that there's about 2 or 3 known copies. And so he's very happy to have it. I got it for a pittance, but it cost me
That's great.
$150, which is nothing for a rarity of that nature. The interesting thing about it is the cover had a 33-star flag on it. And for some reason, the 33-star flag is among the rarest, or it's sort of the holy grail of American flag collectors, because in those days they were adding a lot of states on a
Yeah.
regular basis. And every time they would add a state, they would add a star. And for some reason, there was a very short amount of time between the 32nd and the 34th flag. It's sort of like being a presidential collector and collecting William Henry Harrison's signatures while he was in office. As you may remember, he was inaugurated in March, I think it was 31st. Gave the longest speech in presidential history, and then caught a cold at the inauguration and died in a month. So there's only about couple dozen known signatures of him as president. So for completists who like to collect, again, collectors who like to collect presidential signatures while in office, that's the holy grail. Very much like of people who collect signatories of the Declaration of Independence. There's one particular guy who was a very odd fellow from South Carolina by the name of Button Gwinnett. And he managed to get to Philadelphia to sign the document, and then faded away into history. And there's probably only a handful of his known autographs of this fellow, one of which is on the Declaration of Independence. So if you're a completist and you want a signature of everybody that signed the Declaration of Independence, you have to have a Gwinnett, and there's not that many out there.
Well, one thing there's a lot of is magazines. And what you say in your introduction is that the market for magazines is seemingly endless and largely uncatalogued, which is an opportunity to discover new material and get it, as you've just said, for a pittance.
Correct.
I know that you started off by looking for the first issue of Look magazine, but I just wonder what attracted you to magazines in the first place, generally.
That particular issue attracted me because I was interested in origins of things, and what was the first of this and the first of that, and I would go to a newsstand and say, I wonder what this magazine, where that came from, and how it began. Some of them were easy, like Life. I mean, Life was an iconic magazine that began in 1936, and it was such a collector's item, even when it first came out, because it was the second magazine of Henry Luce's empire. Actually, the third magazine of Henry Luce's empire. That everybody it has a gorgeous cover by Margaret Burke White of the Fort Peck Dam. So everybody saved it. It may have been very collectible, but it was a quote unquote collector's item at the time.
Right.
Everybody saved it. And now they're all over the place. I mean, you literally, if you want the first issue of Life magazine, you just put in Life first issue on eBay, and out comes 30 of them. But Look magazine was a totally different thing, it was a bit of an offshoot of Life. Look was more of a tabloid magazine, and it was more racy.
It was perhaps a bit downscale from Life.
Life was the ultimate photojournalistic magazine. Look was more of a tabloid. It would be a National Enquirer kind of story of people, because they appealed to a different group of people.
So is it this origin thing that got you then, that you wanted?
It was the origin thing, because again, the story is that I walked into this bookstore in Chicago. Well, its first issue of Life was there next to the first issue of Look. He had a magazine there which said, "This is our first issue of Look." It was an anniversary issue, and it had Hermann Goering on the cover. So I opened it up, and it said Look, and then it said Volume 1, Number 2. So I said to the guy, he says, the dealer, his name was Roy. I'll never forget walking into that store. It was 50 years ago. He said, "We don't know what number 1 was. It may have been a may have been a pornographic issue. We don't know what it was, but clearly number 2 was their first newsstand issue. So it took a number of years before I finally found out the answer.
It was a kind of a mystery that you had
Mystery,
solved.
exactly. It was a mystery to be solved. You got it.
Right. Okay. And so it was on this particular magazine. And then what? There was a conflagration after that? Like, I got to get every magazine in America that was ever published?
Well,
or what?
then I would go to a newsstand and I'd say, here's Playboy, where did that come from? And here's
Right.
Esquire, where did that come from? And here's
Right.
Fortune, and where did that come from? And
Yes.
here's Harper's, where would that come from? That goes all the way back. That goes all the way back to 1850. And here's National
Sure.
Geographic, where would that come from? And that goes all the
Yes.
way back to 1845.
Okay.
And over the years, it took quite some time. I go searching old bookshops, magazine shops, journals. There were antique newspapers in those days where every week they would list the antiques for sale. And then, of course, there were book fairs, ephemera fair. Ephemera means things that were never designed to be kept, short-lived.
Exactly.
So,
designed to be thrown away.
So everything behind me here was not intended to be preserved. Like I'm looking at one right now. I collect these World War II magazines. In 1942 there was a campaign called United We Stand, where the Magazine Publishers Association approached the Department of the Treasury and said, "Hey, let's get together and sell war bonds." So
Right.
This happens to be a magazine, part of the campaign. Clearly, it says United We Stand right on the bottom of the magazine. The magazine's called The Boatswain's Whistle, from a shipyard in Henry Kaiser's shipyard. Henry Kaiser was a shipbuilder and a car builder. And he actually had a shipyard in Oregon, but he also had one in Vancouver. So it had a Canadian interest to it. This is the official flag issue, the United We Stand campaign. And we thought perhaps there were 400 or 500 of them. The Library of Congress has a collection of them with about 400 or 500 of them. So my friend and I have been collecting them, and it turns out there's thousands of them. And
Right.
Interestingly, these magazines by American standards are not old. By British standards, they're new. They're about 80 years old. They come from 1942. New ones show up all the time.
So again, it gets to your point, doesn't it? That there's all sorts of stuff to discover that hasn't been documented.
Right. And as I put in that essay, if you're a stamp collector and you want the first American issue, U.S. Scott #1, let's say, or Canada #1. There it is.
Yeah.
It's in the book. Everything is cataloged. All the colors, all the perforation types.
All you're doing is following lists, aren't you?
Lists, right? Or if you're a coin collector, there's the blue book. So if you want an 1842 dollar, if you want it in mint condition, you can get it, and it costs X much. And if it's less than condition, the price goes down. But these things are known. There's no surprises. You're not going to come up with an item that's not known. Magazine-wise, like yesterday, I didn't know this other thing existed, and I'm walking, and I've been doing this for fair half a century.
Right.
So I walk into the room, and the first booth I go to had this nice little magazine in original wrappers from 1821, and it was $30, and I got my, and I got my collection.
You got your thrill.
And it was fun.
Yeah. Well, what you say, again, just following along in that essay, is that magazines are a platform to understand the nuances of American cultural history.
Absolutely. Magazines were the internet before there was an internet. If you were someone looking for information in, let's say, 1915, and you wanted to know something about something, clearly there wasn't any internet. I mean, the radio was basically for people listening into shortwave dots and dashes. There was no television. Newspapers would tell you what was happening, the news of the day, and advertising about what was going on. But if you wanted to see something different or learn about something, you had to go to the newsstand and get a magazine about it. Right. If you wanted to see an illustration by an illustrator, or if you wanted to find out about a topic, if you're interested in automobiles, for instance, And you'd have to go and get an automobile magazine because you couldn't find information about it anyplace else.
Yeah,
And the
okay.
newsstand was full of general interest magazines like Leslie's and Collier's, which were full of automobile advertising. That's how
Okay.
you found out. That was it. Magazines were the analog internet. Now we have the digital internet. They meld into each other because you can find things in different ways.
So what you did, though, you found at the State Street bookshop in Ann Arbor, you found that he had bought a big collection of first volume, first issue.
Yeah, that was my old friend Kevin Sheets. He had a store in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I got a catalog in the mail from him one day. It was a catalog of items from this collection that he had bought. And the key magazine in that collection was a magazine called The Yellow Kid. Now, The Yellow Kid was a very important cartoon character by Richard F. Outcault. The Yellow Kid's considered the first repeating comic strip character by a number of comic historians. It's not true, but it's come down as a very important milestone in history of comic art. What happened is that two newspaper editors who were vying to be the preeminent tabloid publishers in New York City, both used the Kid as a way of sensationalizing their content. It got to the point where they tried to outdo each other, both using the Kid to do that. And because of that, it turns out that the Yellow Kid became the name of what's now called yellow journalism. Those two newspaper publishers, who went on to also have magazine empires, were William Randolph Hearst and the vaunted Joseph Pulitzer. Everybody looks at Pulitzer, oh, he's this guy, the Pulitzer Prize, he was the scion of journalistic ethics.
Integrity,
you got to win a Pulitzer Prize. There was no Hearst Prize. Hearst was always considered a guy who was an opportunist. But Pulitzer was every bit as bad as Hearst when it came to that. He just wanted to sell newspapers. So this magazine was in that collection. I deviate. So that it was in the collection, and it was listed for like $85. I'll never forget. So I the fastest I could pick up a telephone, I called him and bought it.
That's right.
And he says, you know what? I want to see whatever you got. So I got on a plane. I went to Ann Arbor to Michigan, and I bought the whole thing.
How many?
There were a couple of thousand. I bought everything from the 18th century. He had not that much. There was a lot of 19th century material, much of which I've never seen other copies of. And there was 20th century material, quite a bit of this. I didn't buy all the 20th century material because there were boxes and boxes and boxes of it. But I did buy all the highlights.
Well, again, you were interested in volume 1, number 1, right? Like
that was it. The origin, volume 1, number 1, the first this, the first that. Yeah.
The first
that of course changed, because then when you get into magazines, well, first of all, you get into Norman Rockwell. Then I had to have every Norman Rockwell magazine cover.
Saturday Evening Post, there's 321.
321, beginning in May of 1916, and last one was 1963. It was actually a reproduction, a reprinting of a previous cover, because it was the John F. Kennedy Memorial issue. He had done John Kennedy and Richard Nixon for the Post for the 1960 election, so they took the 1960 portrait and put it in a black border, and that was the memorial issue for JFK on the Post.
I just picked one up a few days ago because I'm just like you. I have to get a fix every day, it seems.
That's right. You got it. You're hooked.
Oh yeah, no. I've been this way for a long time on books, but I don't think it was you, but certainly you stoked the fire, because I've just become really interested in magazines. Just because of exactly what you're saying. There's such a cool reflection of what's going on at the time. Plus, there's all this beautiful design work that's folded in.
Absolutely. I mean, as I told Jim Axelrod, who did a wonderful piece on me for CBS Sunday Morning, it's on my website. Always a magazine. There's always something I could show people, and they go say, wow, I didn't know that was there.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you an example of this. I found this magazine.
Yes. You got to pull it back. That's National Home. That's a Canadian magazine.
That's a Canadian magazine. And of course, I had no idea about it. But here it is. It's from Winnipeg. And they produced during the Depression in the 30s this absolutely gorgeous magazine.
Right.
What a thrill to be even just to discover that and to learn that this was going on in Canada, in Winnipeg, in the Depression.
Oh yeah. Well, the major magazine that bucked the trend was Fortune. Henry Luce decided that he's going to put out a magazine in 1930 with a cover price of $1. $1. I mean, people are buying apples, for a penny a piece, and the magazine worked. People bought it because there was not, it's nothing like there is now, but there was an upper crust of people in America who were interested in business and design. Maybe then it was a smaller percentage of the people that it is now, because wealth has changed. The middle class has gone kaput, but it succeeded. I mean, Vogue magazine started as a magazine of Mrs. Astor's 400, and it was a society magazine. And then in 1906, it was bought by Condé Nast, and he turned it into a fashion magazine that was incredibly beautiful and important. And they pioneered fashion photography in the 30s. And Vogue is, but there's a magazine for everybody. I mean, I just reach into a box down here, Here's a magazine issued by DuPont for World War II, the people that made the nylon for parachutes.
Now, okay, Stephen, can you tell me? Now, the thing is, I've already bought some, but it looks like that's in a cellophane wrapper so that you can see both sides, because I bought them with a cardboard insert.
Right. Well, yeah. That'll hold it stiff. But if the magazine is, this one is it's buoyant enough that it's not going. Newspapers, which are very thin and large and fragile, they need a backing. But most magazines, some don't. I mean, here's one. This one I haven't put in a stiff in yet. Like here's one I got, which is very rare. This is from Turkey. From World, but it happened. It's Americana. Here's Uncle Sam. And this is a magazine which is published in Turkey in 1940, during World War II, showing Uncle Sam doling out money to John Bull.
Where'd you get that one from?
That was on eBay. There was international sellers will sell on eBay. But as you say, design is amazing.
Yeah. Again, I'll continue with the essay. You talk about camaraderie and knowledge. So I guess that's just talking to other collectors, developing friendships with them. Is that a part?
Exactly. Those are the people. Those are my, as we say, those are my peeps. Those are the people who I like to talk to and associate with. If you go down to the Grolier Club, all you have to say is, "So what do you collect?" And then the flood opens. They can't wait to tell you, "Oh, I put this and that." And
you just got to hope that you like what they collect.
even if but everybody, but the passion that they talk about. I mean, there's a lot of people that collect 16th century manuscript material. I don't particularly care to own it, but the way they talk about it is fascinating.
It is.
This one wonderful fellow who was a Grolier member, he collects travel logs of people that travel to India. Anything to do with that. I mean, he's got a whole house full of these things.
It's okay. So we talked about origins, and so the question is sort of how did the magazine come to be, and the types of questions you would ask would be: is it a first of a new genre? Is it is it a result of a new technology? Is it reflecting a new philosophy? Is it reflecting a creative mind, a revolutionary idea? You've got 83,000. You can't have them all. So you do have to have some parameters.
Right. Well, I mean, the 83,000 are often first volumes of magazines. So if a
I
magazine is
see.
a
Yeah,
weekly, and I happen to have the first 3 years of it,
yeah.
then I have 156 different magazines from the first 3 years. So if you add them
Yeah,
all up from all I got, that makes 83,000 in total. As far as
yeah,
different titles are concerned, I
yeah,
probably have about 9,000 different titles of magazines because they happen to be unique and in particular interest, or they're the first issue of magazines. The word magazine it didn't come into the parlance until 1731, when a fellow by the name of Edward Cave in Britain decided to use the Arabic term magazine, which means a storehouse, in the context of a periodical. In other words, a publication which is issued at regular intervals.
yes. Well, and you say that you have an enthusiasm for regularly issued pieces of paper.
That's right. Theoretically, a newspaper is not a periodical because it's issued every day. Each day, is different, but regular periodicals would be a biweekly or
Yeah,
semi-weekly or monthly. And then you get up to an annual, and then some people say, well, an annual, it's every year. That's not a periodical, but it is a periodical. Yeah.
well, again, what I really like about your catalog is that it is giving some insight into why magazines are important. What you say is the signature talent of magazines is to connect people, to mediate and facilitate interaction, even when people are far apart and would otherwise never meet
Right.
to
Yeah,
face.
absolutely. Like, if you were a farmer in 19th century America and you wanted to figure out, when to plant your crops, or what was the newest advances in ways of keeping pests off of your plants, or how to increase your yield, where did you go? You went to a local agricultural journal,
Yep,
and you would find people saying, "This is how I do it." And that was the
advice.
only place you could go. There was no
Yes,
place else.
right. And you say it supported many distinct, cohesive communities.
Correct. Every fraternal organization has their magazines. Every medical organization has their magazines. You create communities. Very much now as you would create a community online. It was Facebook. It was the Facebook of the day because people would go to it for information.
You quote de Tocqueville saying Americans constantly unite and associate. Facebook is tapping into that, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
History repeats itself. It's just a matter of the technology which supports it. When you didn't have an internet, when you didn't have the digital access to the internet, you had access to the newsstand. Even then, in those days, until the 1890s, magazines were mostly read by rich white people. They would then share the magazines, and there was a lot of secondary readership. Some of the great magazines, like the greatest news magazine in America, the first one was called Niles Weekly Register. And Niles never had a circulation of more than 4,000, but people would go to the local general store, the local library, and they would pass it along. And even
right,
though it only circulated 4,000 actual paper copies,
right.
hundreds of thousands of people read them. Or there was a
Interesting.
magazine called Godey's Ladies Book, which had a tremendous influence on American home, and women, and how they cooked, how they conducted their household. That's where they learned it.
It was a forum for exchange, wasn't it?
Absolutely, and people would write letters to the editor or submit articles about what they liked. It never ends. I mean, this network of subjects, how it interact with each other is. I just keep learning more about it.
Well, this podcast is about books, so I'm sort of straying a little bit away from the focus, but I was interested to learn, and I knew this, of course, but books were serialized and first appeared in magazines. And one example you cite is Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was serialized in the slavery weekly, The National Era, before it was issued as a book. And that's really quite common, isn't it?
Yes, I mean that was John Greenleaf Whittier was an abolitionist, and Harriet Beecher Stowe needed a forum, and she started submitting it. It became so popular that then it was picked up as a book, and Uncle Tom's Cabin was the second largest circulated book in the 19th century, only after the Bible. And it all began as a serialization in a newspaper / magazine, the National Era.
Well, this is an important collecting area too for bibliophiles, because they want to get the first edition, but they also want to get the first appearance, which is, as I say, often in magazines.
Probably the greatest example of that is James Joyce's Ulysses in the Little Review.
Anderson.
Ezra Pound was a writer and a poet and a literary entrepreneur.
And a connector.
Yeah, he was a connector. A miserable man personally. He never found anything that he actually really liked. But he did know James Joyce, and he knew Margaret Anderson. And he wrote to Margaret Anderson and says, "I got something for you." And so she starts submitting this work by Joyce, which was unpublished. It was on very, very cheap paper, and the circulation was low. But immediately they realized that they were publishing a classic. Even the issue before it first came out, the wrapper of the magazine beforehand said, "We are about to publish something rather better than Flaubert. We are about to publish an American prose masterpiece." They got out 14 of the 18 parts over the next 2 years until the Society for the Suppression of Vice decided that they didn't like what Joyce had to say, and they refused to let it be sent through the mails, and they suppressed the magazine. And it wasn't until 1933 that the first American edition, book form, of Ulysses was published.
That was Random House.
You know that better than I do.
I think it was.
But it wasn't until 1922 that Sylvia Beach had it published in Paris. That was the first edition. There were a number of pirated editions in America by a fellow by the name of Samuel Roth, but it didn't come out in its complete form in America for a number of years. The same thing happened with Oscar Wilde, because when Lippincott's magazine wanted to have they went to Britain to get a story of a couple of stories. They were unique in magazines at the time because what they published is the entire story in one issue. So you didn't have to buy multiple issues to get the whole thing.
Did they do the Dorian Gray?
So they had a very famous literary lunch. It's on my blog. It's a wonderful story. And they met with two people. They met with Oscar Wilde, and they met with Conan Doyle. Conan Doyle submitted to them the sign of four, or the sign of the four, because there was a misnomer. And Wilde submitted to them a picture of Dorian Gray. The first appearances of them in America came in Lippincott's magazine. Wilde was a controversial fellow at the time, to say the least. When they published it, they edited out a lot of the same-sex material, and that stuff never made it into the final manuscript for 50 years. And Wilde said, well, they bought it, so they could do what they want with it. He had no basis for which to object. And of course, he wound up going on trial for his views, and he was a pioneer when it came to same-sex, homosexual literature.
Yeah, pioneer that ended up in jail.
Yes,
pretty well killed him.
Right, exactly. That's all because of magazines, and because the publishers of Lippincott's magazine wanted to sell magazines.
Yeah, and there is a very interesting relationship between book publishers and magazine publishers and authors, and the kind of money they used to make too, which was huge. I mean, Fitzgerald made big bucks by putting his stories into magazines.
Fitzgerald, yes. He made probably more from the publishers from book publishing that he did for magazines. Though he started out in magazines. The Beautiful and Damned appeared in an obscure magazine, not relatively obscure magazine, Metropolitan Magazine in 1921, and
Right.
then came out in book form, different version. And then later on, This Side of Paradise and Gatsby were never serialized in a periodical. But those
Right.
were the original. Hemingway, unlike otherwise, he was very, very associated with magazines his whole life. He serialized his best stuff in magazines.
Scribner's and elsewhere, right?
Scribner's. I mean, he published in at least 25 different magazines. His first national appearance was in a very obscure little magazine from New Orleans called The Double Dealer. That was his first national appearance. In my collection, I have his first thing he ever published, and that was in his high school magazine in 1960
Oh, wow.
in Oak Park, Illinois. It's in the book.
Again, it gets back to this obsession for first.
Of course, his last great novel was published in a single issue of Life magazine.
Yes.
And then, what?
Was that The Old Man and the Sea?
Correct. That issue was a complete issue. And shortly after that, he became depressed. Went off to was it Idaho and put a bullet.
Yeah.
In his head. But even recently, I'm getting phone calls because in 1946, John Hersey published his very famous book
Hiroshima
as a single issue of the New Yorker.
That's neat. Yeah.
And only recently there was an article. Sunday. There was an article last Sunday. It was an article in the New Yorker about the issue of the magazine that had a little band on it, a little belly band, which is attached to the front, because the cover was just, you would not know what was inside the magazine if you looked. And they wanted to warn people to say that, if you buy this magazine, what's inside is not particularly pretty.
Yeah.
Cover. So
you've got the band, of course.
No, I don't. I mean, I didn't even know
don't.
about it. I don't even know about it.
Okay.
So I don't even know about it. So now it's on my list, and I imagine I'll be offered one. But they're rare because as soon as you open the magazine, you'd rip off.
They're gone. Yes.
I mean, I could show you a copy of Hiroshima, but the Hiroshima issue. The band is a different thing altogether. It's kind of like the dust jacket of a book. But the belly bands are even more ephemeral than the dust jacket, because people would save the dust jacket to keep the book.
Now they do, yeah.
You'd have to rip off the belly band in order to read the damn magazine. So you'd throw it out. Why would anybody want to save it? So somebody apparently found the one.
Except for a crazy collector.
Right. Well, whatever. Well, I don't even think it was a collector. Probably just had it and put it in a box someplace. I didn't even know what they had.
Right.
And now it came to light. Now I'm sure I'll be offered one shortly. People know who I am and what I collect. So I will be offered one shortly. But I must have gotten 5 phone calls. And yesterday I'm at this book fair, and hey, Steve, do you got to hear a show? No, I said no, I don't. But they would come up to because they know who I am now.
Yes.
It's yeah. So that's the beauty of it all.
Well, again, as you say, you're learning new things every
single day. Nothing.
Yeah.
I never cease to be amazed. I found the magazine yesterday at the book fair. It was a copy of the Humor Life magazine. Just a very nice little issue. I look on the back cover, and there is an advertisement for Lucky Strike cigarettes with George Gershwin on the back cover. It was $10. I said, that's nice. Now it's nice to get George Gershwin. I mean, George Gershwin didn't die of lung. He died of cancer, but he didn't die of lung cancer. It's funny because a lot of the athletes who later on went on to die of lung cancer, you get magazines of them advertising cigarettes,
watching them killing themselves.
Right. And of course, the cigarettes advertising supported so many tobacco industry put a lot of magazines on the map. They spent a fortune.
Like car ads. Yeah.
Well, you had Lucky Strike, LSMFT. Lucky Strike means fine tobacco. Old Gold used to advertise not a coffin, a carload. Then you get the Marlboro Man. All the these are now all defunct, but
period pieces.
Yeah.
So with this catalog, you got to do all sorts of thinking, I guess, about how you would categorize your collection. Is that right?
I guess you had to, because you got to put it into chapters. Yeah.
Yes,
So
exactly. I was going to say that you've got a range of different chapters.
I went, yeah.
Um,
I didn't do it.
building a nation.
I didn't do it all myself. I mean, I had a group of consultants and friends who know about individual areas of collecting pulp. One guy who collected pulp magazines, the fellow
Yeah,
who is the historian for Major League Baseball. He contributed. I worked with him on one of the chapters to put it all
well,
together.
you can tell that because they're well written and they're full of interesting information about the category. So you've got, for example, I'll cite some of them. You've got Building a Nation, A House Divided, America and the World, The Information Age, The Urge to Reform, A Nation of Readers, the literary magazines, American Avant-Gardism, little magazines, Literature for the People, pulp magazines. You've got humor magazines, African American, sports, theater, movies. It's just interesting how you can slice up your collection, and each one of these categories has a fascinating story behind it.
Right, and you also learn about things. For instance, movies. The movie industry began in France, but soon after was co-opted in America by Thomas Edison, who owned all the patents. He owned the patents for the film and for the cameras and all the equipment. So in America, if you wanted to publish to make a movie, you had to pay Thomas Edison to do it, and then he had a cartel.
How did your collecting magazines help you understand that?
Well, because there are magazines which opposed the cartel, and by the independent filmmakers who decided this is not good. They were the ones that brought an antitrust suit against Edison in 1915, and that changed the movie industry.
Okay, so look,
you got some things there to show me.
Yeah, our listeners can't see this. I just picked up, of course, like it's so fun to pick these things up.
Right, there's a Silver Screen magazine is one. There's
it was a beautiful illustrated image of the actor Richard Green.
Right, because what happened originally when movies came out, it was about the story of the magazine. It was about the story that they were. Then film producers found out that they can sell more movies by turning some of the actors into the chief attraction. And then what happened is that a number of the artists said, "Hey, wait a minute! You got to pay us to do this." And then they formed their own company. Most famously, they formed United Artists.
And so have you got magazines that sort of reflect that what is happening there?
Absolutely. They didn't really feature movie stars until the first movie star is someone you probably never heard of. It was a woman whose name was Florence Lawrence. And she was the first person ever to be billed. It was about 1916 or 17. She was the first person ever to be billed as a star. So she was the first, quote, movie star.
Okay. So what did you got? Like, how does your magazine collection reflect that?
Well, there are no magazines I've ever found with Florence Lawrence on the cover, but Charlie Chaplin became a rage, and he's all over magazines. Then you got Mr. Sex, Rudolph Valentino, the Lat lover, and he became a superstar. Screen Book. Yeah, that's a nice mag. That's from the 40s. Richard Green.
Look at him, eh?
He's a relatively minor star, but
it's a beautiful image.
Absolutely. I illustrated some of the things. You get, Greta Garbo and the original blonde bombshell, Jean Harlow.
You've got that. There's photography, but you've also got all sorts of wonderful illustrators that work on the magazines.
Oh, absolutely. Well, the golden age of illustration coincided with the golden age of magazine publishing.
What years would those be, Stephen?
Well, the printing technology came of age probably in just at the turn of the 20th century. See, there was a revolution in magazines about 1890. What happened was the couple of things. Up until that time, as I said, magazines were basically circulated among rich white people. And the way magazine publishers decided they wanted to make money up until that point was to sell subscriptions to magazines. A number of publishers, particularly S.S. McClure and Frank Muncie and Edward Bach, Cyrus Curtis, they decided that they would do it a different way. What they would do then is they would reduce the
They would
cover
sell the
price.
subscriptions up front, wouldn't they? So because prior to that, they would just hope they would get.
Exactly. And often they didn't get paid and they would fold. So what they decided they would do is they changed the way magazines were the entire financial structure of magazines. They reduced the price to a nickel so anybody could buy one. And what they did was they solicited advertisers.
Because they had bigger circulations.
Right. The advertisers drove the circulations.
The fact that it was cheaper meant more people could
More
afford it.
people could buy it. So then, and then they would make a fortune from advertising. And just about that time, halftone printing became technically capable of reproducing color. And within 5 years, Ladies' Home Journal had a circulation of 1 million. But every magazine, if you go to the magazines that began from the 1890s forward, they're relatively small size magazines. And there would be pages of advertising in the beginning and pages of advertising at the end. And then they would hire illustrators like N.C. Wyeth and wonderful illustrators like Norman Rockwell. Nast was mostly inside the magazine, but Thomas Nast as well. His relationship with Harper's Weekly is legendary. And then the magazine circulations boomed. And then what also happened was the automobile industry decided was starting to come into its own. And many magazines, the advertising of new cars supported the huge circulations.
And they're stunning too, those.
Absolutely gorgeous. If you pick up a magazine, pick up a Ladies' Home Journal or a Collier's from 1905, and J.C. Leyendecker and James Montgomery Flagg and Howard Chandler Christie and Harrison Fisher, all these wonderful, wonderful artists. They're just full of wonderful advertising and illustration. All of that was a perfect storm at the time because that's what made big circulations. And then, of course, you had people like William Randolph Hearst and Condé Nast who catered to the higher end of magazine publication.
Yeah, he said something like he wanted to get it was like 100,000 of the most cultivated Americans in America.
Right. So
he could sell luxury items to them.
Right, exactly. There were niches for everybody. Again, Vogue started that way. It was bought by Condé Nast, and he turned it into a very high circulation. Then Vanity Fair came in, and the covers are absolutely gorgeous. Yeah.
So obviously, condition is key, just like it is with books.
Not so much. I mean, if you're dealing with rarities, as I do, it's something you've never seen before. I collect pulp magazines. Pulp magazines are published on terrible paper, cheap paper. The key there was just to put anything out you possibly can with a pretty cover, pay the authors a penny a word, and just write a bunch of stuff that people would read. They didn't have any ideas of creating beautiful things. Some of them are just incredibly rare. And so if you see one for the first time, you don't go, well, I'm going to hold off until I get a better copy. It doesn't work that way. Now, book collectors are nuts when it comes to this. If you want to, the idea of having a Great Gatsby with a first edition dust jacket, you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars as opposed to just the book, which you can buy a rough copy for a couple $100.
Yeah.
So, but when it comes to magazines are published, again, they're ephemerals. They were designed to be thrown away. So the idea of having a magazine in great condition, not really. I mean, it's nice to have a better condition one than a non-better condition, but condition means a lot less than they do to book collectors, because book collectors are nuts when it comes to having the dust jacket and a perfect condition, or they care more about that than the few of us magazine collectors do.
Okay, so I'm going to just get to, as we wind this down, I want to get specific here about, I'm a typical collector here because I'm showing off stuff, and we love to do that, don't we? But I just picked this one up.
Right. The Norman Rockwell, the piano tuner, you betcha.
Right. So Is this one more valuable than a Saturday Evening Post that doesn't have a Rockwell on it?
The problem with posts is that they were issued in the hundreds of thousands, so they're not
Yes,
really
yes.
rare.
Right. And that
Uh,
drives the price.
Right. I
obviously.
mean, yes, people do collect Rockwells, and one of the first things I ever tried to do was get a complete collection of Norman Rockwell's 321 covers, which I did. But it's not
Yeah.
it's not a particularly difficult task. Oddly enough, the rarest, the most collectible right now of the post covers comes from 1940. Was it 40 or 41? I think it's 41. There was one issue where they had a Rockwell cover. Was nice, but the inside was the first article for Alcoholics Anonymous.
Oh, nice. Okay.
If you go to eBay and you put in Saturday Evening Post, the highest issues of that one because the alcoholics, the AA collectors are nuts. They
Yes.
they have that the little red book that they collect in every edition, and that's the earliest printing. There was that in one of the Liberty magazines in 1939 had an article on AA, and those are very, very expensive. I have neither of them in my collection because I could get one if I just want to lay out the money. They're not rare. I get them tomorrow. So
Now-
I'm holding out to find one in a stack of magazines and nobody knows what it is.
Yes. Okay. This one that I showed you, the Saturday Evening Post, is from January 11th, 1947. It's got an article by Irving Wallace on the man who swindled Goring. Now, looking at that, does that say to you, okay, is Irving Wallace collectible?
I don't collect Irving Wallace.
No. What about articles on Goring? Like, is that something you look for?
I'm not a Nazi magazine collector. I mean, I'm interested in Goring only because he appeared on the first issue of the first newsstand issue of Look. The Post. I mean, Salinger published a few articles in the Post. Fitzgerald published in the Post. Faulkner may have had one or two articles in the Post as well. So
Okay.
it's still the people who collect the high-end literary people who look at, are completists. I mean, and like the New Yorker, for instance. I mean, Salinger, he felt that unless you were published in New Yorker, you weren't important. That was considered his milestone to where he would
Yep.
feel that he was important. He published in 46, I think, was his first appearance in New Yorker. From that point on, he published almost everything in the New Yorker. So those issues are very collectible because people collect Salinger material.
Yes, I see. So again, advice to the collector. It sounds to me pretty evident that if there's a popular author, that's what you look for in the magazine. What's your best advice to someone who's thinking, I want to get into collecting magazines?
Collect what you like.
Yeah, that we always hear that though.
Enjoy. You have some degree of focus on what you want to do. Don't get into magazines if you think you're going to get rich. It's not like coin collectors. They're going through coins to try to find the rare nickel or a rare dime or a rare penny. That's not going to work. Or a stamp collector who wants to looking to find a rare stamp. Books are a different story. People collect books because they feel they may have some appreciation value down the line. Many of them do. Some just collect them for the beauty of the book. It's something to give you that deep dopamine satisfaction in your brain that you get. The endorphin rush that you get. The same thing when you run a half a mile or you have a drink of alcohol. You get that same brain rush from things that you like. That's the physiology of collecting.
I see. Okay.
I'm a neurologist by trade, so the neurophysiology of collecting
Yes.
is very deep.
You know what you're talking about.
Well, it's very deep in the brain.
Yes. Yes. So what? So I mean, it's a pleasure principle. You're
Right,
talking.
you have a pleasure center in your brain, and whatever satisfies, whether it's looking at a beautiful thigh of a beautiful woman, or looking at a beautiful book, or a beautiful painting, or a beautiful piece of art.
That's obviously good for you too, right?
Sure it is. People are hedonists. They're always looking for pleasure, But magazines, for me, that's one of the great hedonistic virtues of magazines. I mean, you can see I'm just surrounded by this stuff. I'm buried in it, actually. I got 83,000 of these things sitting around here. it's a great enjoyment in my life. As you can see, I've gotten rewarded by it. I wrote a book, and people seem to think it's a nice book. And am I going to get rich on it? Hell no. I
A
don't care.
beautiful book. It's a lovely, and informative. It's got both those things going for it.
Yeah, and financially, I mean, I paid the Grolier Club to have it published. Wonderful reviews. But I'll never. I'm never going to retire on the money I get from the book. Matter of fact, I'm in the red on the book, and I'm very happy about it because I have no intention of making a fortune on this book. My pleasure is what I'm doing today with you, sharing knowledge and talking about this wonderful method of learning about information.
That's great. Well, I'll just wind it down with a few more questions. Very specific. This is you talking about the cover art of Hearst's, illustrated by Maxfield Parrish and Alphonse Mucha.
Mucha, right.
And here you say in your catalog that these are the most beautiful these illustrations are to have ever graced an American magazine. So that's pretty subjective, but it's a. Well, you say it.
It's a consummation of the art, of the printing technique. Alphonse Mucha was the king of Art Nouveau.
I'm pulling your leg here, but you state very authoritatively that that's the most beautiful.
To me, the Mucha cover on Hearst in 1921 with a woman wrapped in an American flag, it's as beautiful as it gets. I get great pleasure looking at it. And of course, Parrish did a series of 6 covers of children's stories for Hearst. Shortly after Hearst actually had acquired that magazine. One of them is called the Frog Prince, and it's just beautiful. It's beautiful to look at, and it's hard to find in good condition, and it's my favorite. And you're allowed to have favorites, I guess.
Absolutely, you are. Yeah, but you don't say that in your catalog. And again, I'm pulling your leg here. You don't say I think this is. You say this is the most beautiful.
Well, I wrote the book, so then I'm being subjective about it.
Yes, okay. You're right. I mean, Maxfield Parrish's stuff, it's just it's crystal clear. It's photographic in its luster, its beauty. It's really something, isn't it?
I put a quote in the book about Parrish by Douglas Congdon, I believe, who wrote the book on him. And he really put it all together in a brief sentence about why Parrish was as good as he was. I can't quote it to you, but it's in the book. He was a genius. He was a master.
Yeah.
It's like Rockwell was a master, but in a different way. Nobody could tell a story like Norman Rockwell could. Nobody. I mean, you can look at this thing, and you can look at a magazine cover by Rockwell, like the one you have of the piano tuner, and the detail is exquisite, and little things that he would put in there that you could look, and you would go back to it for a third time and say, hey, this kid is wearing this, and he's doing this to make it. You learn about the people. You learn about the subjects, and as he tells you so much more than just the art itself, because he leaves it open to interpretation by giving you little hints within the work itself to let you know about the story that goes into that cover.
Yeah. Speaking of covers, then you also say that Vanity Fair was prized for its Art Deco covers by Benito and Goretto.
And Miguel Covarrubias, and yes.
So, I mean, I'm really I love Art Deco. So how much do I have to fork out for one of those? And what are the best ones to get?
Well, you go to Urte, who was that was the guy that was his real name, but Urte was what he. I mean, you can go on eBay now and you put in the word Urte, and probably for $150, $200, you can get yourself a very nice looking cover by Urte. It's beautiful. There's great John Hell Jr. and there's some just wonderful covers in that era.
What about this Benito and Goretto? What about those ones?
Again, just put it in. They're not terribly expensive, but it's nice if it's something nice to put on your wall and frame and look at. One of my pet peeves about people who will try to make money off of magazines, they'll buy a magazine that was published in the 1920s and tear it apart and sell the individual pages.
Yeah, that's terrible. I hate that.
but they do that, and they could take a magazine for $20 and then sell 5 things in it for $50 each, but it doesn't hold the integrity of the magazine itself.
No, it decontextualizes it.
Correct. It's not what I do because I'm not interested in that aspect of it.
No, again, it's just so good to be able to kind of slip into the pages and into that time period.
Right. Like I'm looking, for instance, let me show you one thing. Like I'm just looking now, I collect these 1942 and 1943 magazines devoted to patriotic covers. The program began in 1942, but some covers were published. So this is my favorite of the 43s.
Art and Architecture.
Right. And the cover is by Ray Eames.
Oh, nice. Yes. Okay.
Charles and Ray Eames. Ray Eames did a number of covers. So this is the woman that designed the Eames chair. So this is very valuable and important to me because of the cover artist.
I think that's what's so interesting. There's so much research that you could do. For example, there was a documentary on Herbert Matter, the designer from Switzerland who came over to New York, and he might have even worked for Eames for a while, like done stuff for them, graphic design.
Right.
I was able to find some of his ads for Kroll.
Yeah.
And he actually signed them. So you can get these magazines for content, but you can also follow all sorts of artists who develop a reputation for not just graphic art, but, real art, if you will. There's all sorts of ways you can slice and dice this kind of collecting.
Right. Well, Frank Lloyd Wright, for instance, he had his own particular style. He did one magazine cover from Town and Country in July 1937, which is magnificent. It's in the book. I was thrilled to get it just before I published the book. It's one of my favorite covers of all time. It's got flags, but it's classic Frank Lloyd Wright. Collectors go nuts over it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for bringing so much passion to our conversation, and thank you for putting this beautiful catalog together so that I can see all the work you've done.
I did it for people like you to enjoy, and I'm thrilled that you and your listeners will get some pleasure out of going through it. I would suggest that people, if they want to see more, just go to my website at AmericanMagazineCollection.com. If you go to that site, you'll find. Feature is now the interview on CBS Sunday Morning with Jim Axelrod and Jane Pauley, and then there's wonderful reviews we got in the New Yorker and the New York Times and Kirkus Reviews. It's all there, and then just simply put in a topic on the upper the box on the upper right and enjoy what you see, because it's just fun to look at.
It's fun to look at and get ideas so that you can get out there and get some for yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the point. Find new things to enjoy in life, and these things are wonderful.
They really are.
Make me happy.
Well, you just made me happy. I had a great conversation with you. Thank you, Stephen
Lomazow.
Great to talk with you.
Nigel, it's a pleasure. If you want to do this again anytime, if you get down to this area of the world, stop by. If you ever plan to come around New York City, stop by, and I'll take you around and show you a few things.
I'd love that. Thank you, Stephen.
My pleasure, Nigel. Have a good day, and I appreciate it.
Very good. Bye for now. Bye.